reaction emojis, so expect a lot of that from me. Okay, I think we good. Perfect. So just gonna kick off. So thank you, V, and welcome everybody, and thank you so much for having us for the talk. My name is Magda. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Flare, and I'm here with Daisy, who is our director of UX and design. Just couple more. I mean, you don't need to know much more about me because we did a excellent introduction. But one thing that I want to say is that my background is more on the sort of the technology and the computer science and what is now very well known as an artificial intelligence method, which are neural networks, which was my subject of research when I was back in academia at the start of my career. At the time, there wasn't really that much application to this technology. That was sort of very much an academic topic, but since then, obviously, especially over the last couple of years, things have changed quite dramatically, and the overall AI science became much more mainstream. And I'm lucky to be a part of that sort of technological evolution. It's really exciting. A lot of my career was in the sort of corporate, very much media. The sort of beginnings when I was in the US was very much a startup, a gaming world. But since I moved to the UK, I've been in BBC, Telegraph, and other sort of media companies. So the world of journalism, newsrooms, media, sort of broadcasting and entertainment is quite familiar to me. But since about 2017, after I'd done my MBA, I realized that actually a really interesting path forward and a career choice is to start your own business, especially if you have technological capability and also some ideas. So before Flare, I created Wave, which was also an algorithmic tool for journalists, which was acquired by Future, and this is how I know V here. But also what V also knows, that when I was creating Wave, design and UX was probably not our biggest focus. So we definitely suffered consequences of that, and I did learn my lesson in terms of building products and bringing products to the market, and this is why somebody like Daisy has become such an important part of Flare and our evolution as well. So just a couple of words about our journey. We have started in January 23, so about a year and a half ago. There was sort of three of us coming together, was myself and Danny, whose background is in journalism, in editorial side of things, as well as Sam, who is a very experienced marketeer. So we're kind of a combination of very different sides, technology, journalism, and sort of commercial side, which came quite useful in the context of our product. Within a couple of months, we have raised a investment and brought in new people, Daisy among them. And by September 23, we have launched our first product. Now, you are going to probably see some snaps from our original product and the journey from there, but and how it evolved and changed. But at the beginning of this year, we actually managed to secure paid clients, which, as sort of minimal as it sounds, turning from a sort of new product into a revenue generating business is actually quite a huge milestone. So we're quite proud of getting there. So why Flare and what is Flare? So the three of us co-founders came from that kind of a media and journalism background. We always knew or understood that the stories, the content, the narratives are really coming from data. They're coming from things that are buried in loads of documents and loads of data sets. And that kind of motivated us to create something that is going to make it easier for a busy journalist or researcher or a policymaker to make it easy to discover narratives and stories within data sets. What normally would happen, and you might know examples like Panama Papers or those big kind of big stories that talented groups of journalists would bring to the audiences, but it took them a long time to really break a story like Panama Papers. It took a couple of years and many journalists to work on that issue, because even though it's all data, it's all somewhere documented, you really need to go and read it, go and analyze it, and that takes huge amount of time. And so Flare wants to be a part of that process and automate quite a lot of that process so that journalists can create and publish and talk to their audiences rather than spend time manipulating spreadsheets or sifting through documents. So that's what the idea is, and that's what we have built. So what we call Flare as a tool, it's a AI research tool for journalists, for researchers, and for analysts. It has probably two areas where we really help organizations and newsrooms in creating more value, and that's in discovering new insights in data, which then results in a upside to the output. So basically, by automating certain things and discovering more stories, they're able to publish more articles. And on the other side, there is the automation, where a lot of the sort of mundane tasks of creating reports or updating those stories can be automated as well. So there is, we already have sort of proven value in those areas as well. So how Flare works, and this is where things get a little bit complicated, not only from the perspective of, okay, here's some science, oh my God, what is she talking about? But there is also the aspect of when the idea came to us and the mission and the ambition sort of was verbalized. Because I'm a technologist or scientist from the background, my first thing that I do is sit down and write some code and really think about how the backend is going to work. Is it really possible to take loads of data sets and join them all together and then discover insights and then put it in the hands of journalists? So what you're going to see on the next couple of slides is that kind of at the beginnings, which is very much about let's build the technology behind the tool that then is becoming a product. And I think that's what we were trying to communicate, how important those two sides are. But the starting point for us was that kind of a scientific side of things. So there's a couple of elements or components in the process behind Flare. So you can see sort of at the start, there is a data set, and then at the end, the other side are the insights. So that's what we're trying to discover from data. In the middle, you can see two boxes here, but the reality often is that it's quite time-consuming, not very interesting to do for a lot of the users, and takes a lot of time. So to take a data set and clean it up and structure it and to normalize it, it takes quite a lot of time, especially if you're trying to join that data set to some other data sets. So that's the element that we have automated. And then the other element is that insight generation. So what we call Flare generation is really discovery of anomalies, predictions, discovery of patterns. And that box, it's really less to do with AI as we understand it today, but more to do with machine learning, with statistics, with sort of mathematical analysis of data. But before we can do it, we need to interpret the data and structure the data. So that data interpretation model has become the core IP, the core asset for Flare, and this is where we utilize most of the AI, being the generative AI or the large language models that we sort of currently hear a lot about and adopting a lot. So I'm gonna just focus on that element while trying to explain how this works. So that element, that sort of process of interpretation, and again here you need to, and I don't want to ask you on Thursday evening with a glass of wine to imagine what it would take to take in an Excel spreadsheet. I know that nobody wants to really think about this, but if you imagine taking a spreadsheet that you sort of downloaded from something, or you just got internally from your documents, you look at the spreadsheet, you use the sort of human interpretation to look what are the columns, what are the values, what is the data, what is there. And as a human, you can sort of interpret certain elements of that spreadsheet. So that process of interpretation in a very human way, we are trying to mimic that process using large language models. And we do it through application of what is called the RAG system. Again, you might have heard of RAG because it's been quite widely talked about now in the context of large language models. But basically what it is if you think about the large language model that is very good and can generate some text, can generate some labels, using its own brain and its own knowledge that acquired through the training process based on the internet effectively. But that knowledge that it used to train itself, it's quite generic because it's the internet, so it's everything. Whereas when I'm trying to give my system a very specific task, like take this spreadsheet and tell me what is in the spreadsheet and make it nice, that is quite specific task. So I need to, or I want to, add my own knowledge and point the whole system to that specific knowledge so that the response is much more reliable and correct. And this is basically what the RAG system, what the whole system is about. So I'm gonna come back again to an example here. Promise this is the last spreadsheet I'm gonna show you. So in this example, you have a data set from National Statistical Office that talks about multiple deprivation rank. So it's a score that ONS would track. This spreadsheet has quite specific names, specific things in it. And also what National Statistical Office would have is quite a clear and nicely sort of put together documentation. So we use that documentation, push it into the system, push those files into the system together, and then when I want my interpretation model to give me back clean and nicely labeled data set, the system is using that specific documentation with that specific spreadsheet. So it's very reliable in that sense, because it really uses the knowledge that I provided to the system, which in this case is documentation for that specific data set. And we were making some experiments to try to compare the performance of that approach versus just sort of generic language models, and the way the accuracy, the level of accuracy that we have achieved reached about 96% over about 60% that the sort of more generic model would give. And that is significant because if you think about people using that to interpret the data set, and you have every second data set incorrect, that's not a very good output. But if you have nearly every data set cleaned in the correct way, that is something that an organization, a journalist, a user can live with. So I think we were able to add that innovation to the product. But obviously, as I said before, that is all about that functionality. Like I made something work, it's doing something that I wanted to do and something that I think it's going to solve the the problem of our users. But it's really what Daisy brought to the table, and that sort of understanding how do we connect this to the user, to our clients, and effectively turn it into a product and a business has been incredibly important. So I'm going to hand over to Daisy now.
Thank you, Magda. So yeah, hi, I'm Daisy. I am Director of Design and UX here at Flare. Magda's obviously given a very technical overview there of what Flare does in the background. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal journey into UX, and then speak about how design has helped us take that data interpretation and make it accessible to our users. So I haven't probably followed the traditional route into this role and into UX. There's been a lot of learning on the job, but I do think that's probably a reality of sort of the startup world. Lots of people sort of coming into a startup at different points in their career, and it's been really exciting. So the slides are not moving as I hoped they would, but here we go. My background isn't actually in UX. Outside of Flare, I have a 9 to 5 that I try to balance with the work that I'm doing with design here. My full-time role is within operations at a publishing company. So I spend quite a lot of my time looking at processes and system improvements to benefit user engagement and the user journey. So there are definite parallels, but I've always wanted to sort of flex the creative side of my brain and put my obsessive eye for detail to good use. So just before lockdown, I decided to begin studying UI and UX design with Career Foundry. And as we all know, it turned out to be the best time to do it because I literally had nothing better to do than study and plow all my efforts into my next app design project. And I loved it. So for those of you that don't know, some may be familiar with Career Foundry, but it's kind of a bootcamp type program. I worked with a mentor and I created a handful of app projects from ideation through to prototype. But career, changing my career, it's not easy. I had around 8 years in my operations role and sort of commitments that meant, I couldn't just quit my job. And sort of the thought of starting again at the bottom rung of, a completely new field was really, really daunting. But that's where I've been really fortunate with Flare. So during my time at the publishing company, I worked with Sam, who's one of the co-founders that Magda mentioned before. He had moved companies, but we remained friends, so he knew about my journey and my love and interest in UX. And he came to me one day and said, "Hey, I'm looking at building an app with some colleagues. Would you be interested in helping us with some design work?" And the rest is history. So, but yeah, I could tell from those initial conversations that this wasn't just like, random idea that people had. It definitely had legs, and they were filling a hole in the market. So I didn't know when I had those first conversations how involved I would end up being, or where the product or the experience was going to end up going, whether it was that initial drink in the pub and then that would be it, or actually, it's come to where we are now. I've been really, really fortunate that each of the co-founders put their trust in me. And I was also able to invest at an early stage, which kind of committed myself to the vision. Over the past year and a bit, I've dedicated around 1.5 days a week to Flare. And in return, I've received a breadth of experience that I would not have been able to get in a sort of another, a different environment, which I guess is the general rule of a startup. Everyone, has to wear multiple hats. So my experience has definitely not been just with the UX. My design responsibilities have sort of stretched from creating social media posts, building the website, designing posters and banners, tidying up, sales pitches and investor decks. So yeah, lots of different sort of design elements that have been covered. And I guess whilst maintaining a full-time job and working part-time on this project, it's definitely not been easy, but I guess it has provided that kind of stable transition for my career, which has been really good. And not being able to dedicate my full headspace and much time has definitely been one of the biggest challenges though. And there's been a lot of guilt, that I can't dedicate more and do more. And, also having to navigate different calendars with other part-time members of staff and having to play catch up when you're out of the loop for a few days. There's a lot of different things that you have to navigate being, a part-time staff member within a startup. But the dream is that with funding, Flare will expand and continue to grow, and I'll be able to go full-time. So that's kind of what we are aiming for. But no companies exist without challenges. Startups do provide their own set of realities that we need to navigate. And like I said, this is my first time in a startup, so that in itself has been a learning curve. I think Magda, touched on, she's kind of seen the benefit that focusing on design can have, from her experience, with one startup that there was no design focus, and this one where we've definitely sort of given it a bit more prioritization. So one of my main focuses right from the very early conversations has been developing and building a brand. Obviously, when you're building something from scratch, you only have your ideas to go from, so everything becomes an option, and you can get a bit sort of caught up in creating multiple names and logos and color schemes, and they would sort of change on almost a weekly basis. So I really took it as my first challenge to pin down a cohesive brand that we could use to drive all our other ideas forward. And there's some examples here of those sort of early branding ideas that we had. And as you can see, one of them almost led us to a legal dispute with Tinder because we were worryingly close to copying their logo. But once we put that behind us, we settled on the current branding, as you can see. And I think it played a really big part in not only having sort of a brand to put out externally, to the world, but also internally a real shift in mindset that now we had. Obviously we had all the back end, but now we kind of had a product that we could kind of start selling to people. It immediately made us seem more professional, and we were able to start putting it into our sales and investor pitches, and building a social media presence as well, which we hoped would start to build trust and we'd become recognizable as Flare. So unifying our core value and identity meant that although our product offering was evolving all the time, our messaging could remain consistent. And here's some examples of Flare out in the wild doing its thing in various iterations over time. So design has also sort of helped us navigate the changes that are so prominent with startups. As we touched upon, the product that Flare is building, it keeps evolving. And I imagine that's pretty much the case for most early stage startups. And I can't imagine anyone goes out there with a straight to market product from the first day. So, in the beginning, our hearts and our sights were set on building an app. And my involvement was predominantly sort of designing wireframes, and I was really iterating in tandem with the co-founders as they ironed out, as Magda talked about, the science and the technology for the output at the back end. Another sort of learning and reality of the startup world is that we haven't been in the position where we have the money or the resources to undertake lots of user research or user testing and market research. So before we had something that we could start taking to clients and seeing what they thought of it, it was very much going to our family and friends, and see what they thought of it. And our initial idea was to build a B2C product aimed at content creators that gave them quick and easy access to data insights. And we did make that a reality. We did succeed, but we kind of quickly realized that the technology that we had built was better suited more to a B2B market, which is also a much more scalable and profitable solution, which is sort of an added benefit. So we moved away from the app and looked at platforms that clients could embed within their workflows, as we were sort of reaching out to journalists and editors. You know, that they're obviously working much more from desktops. So it did mean that the interface that we were then designing was more a desktop interface than mobile. And the products that we have since built allow for incredibly fast insight discovery and publishing, and they can also be fully customized with client branding. So they can embed them within their own websites, and it means that our clients can effectively create their own completely new data products, which is pretty cool. Being agile and open to feedback has definitely been one of the most important elements in building Flair. I think primarily, you know, our user research and feedback has been obtained during our sales cycle when we're gathering requirements from what our clients want and need. And by understanding that sort of market need, we've been able to evolve our product in line with that. But whilst being adaptable to client requirements has been hugely important, it is key as well that, you know, we take stock, because we can't say yes to everything, and we don't want to lose sight of what it is that we're trying to build. Whilst we built the initial app from scratch, that I think one of the learnings is that hasn't been the reality for some of the more recent iterations of the product. So small budgets, the nature of a startup, and also the need to turn client requirements around on tight timescales has meant that a lot of the more recent work has been adapting existing frameworks and using platforms like Google Looker Studio, which you're probably all familiar with. So whilst, you know, the projects I was doing with Career Foundry kind of equipped me with the skills to develop app ideas and platforms from scratch, one of the biggest learning curves has definitely been sort of utilizing what already exists. I think that's been really important. You know, you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. You can use what's out there, and it has really, really positive results. So by incorporating, you know, this incredible AI technology that the team built with our branding on Looker Studio, we've been able to create dashboards, you know, and we've as a result, we've secured our first clients, as Magda mentioned, and we were able to meet their requirements at pace. And I think for startups, the importance of getting to market fast and being able to prove that we can deliver what we promised cannot be overlooked. It's hugely important. The other thing that we've sort of had to remember is our clients are not the only people to consider when we're building, also when I'm building these platforms. You know, we're a small team, and everyone in that team needs to be able to access the platform, get up to speed with it quickly, edit it, use it, and make sure that the clients can access it. So there's a number of different user cases. So something like this has been really, really valuable. So although we initially built an app that we no longer use, you know, there was a lot of work that went into that, but it was definitely not a wasted experience by any stretch. Much of what we were able to create with that initial app still remains. And I think that's probably because the design elements that we used matched what our mission was, which didn't change. So that's to discover every insight that data has to offer and to make that data accessible. So across the app, the editor product, the dashboards, visualizing the data has always been at the forefront. As you, I'm sure, got from what Magda spoke about, the technology on the back end is incredibly complex. I don't half the time understand a word of it. But, you know, from a front end user perspective, this, you know, simplicity is queen, and just not overthinking it. You know, we've focused on simple visualization. So we always just have a heading, a subheading, and a chart. And that gives the user what they need. They're able to see from that the data that they need. And with each insight that they are given that's, you know, created for them, they can immediately determine whether it's of any use. They can swipe through to the next one if it's not. And if it's useful, they can immediately start putting it to work and use it in their content. I think as we continue growing Flare, we definitely have visions that we'll be able to create our own dashboards and, you know, introduce hopefully many more products that will be hugely valuable to our customers. But simplicity from a front end perspective will always remain at the forefront of making that data interpretation effortless for our users.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Daisy. So we just have a couple of sort of learnings to finish off. That kind of a thing that Daisy have mentioned a lot about developing and using the feedback from the clients in the startup environment, where you're bringing something completely new. It is much less about iterating to make the product better for your target user. It is much more about finding that target user. So that thing about having the clients and then listening to the feedback, but not going crazy about every single piece of feedback, because ultimately you need to think about the future of the product and how to keep it sort of scalable and on a long term. And I think as a part of that process, we've also learned that the ultimate measure of success is not what your clients or your colleagues or your family and friends that see the product tell you, but whether somebody is willing to pay for the product. And that is ultimately what is the measure of success. Because especially in startups, you talk to your, you don't have budgets to do sort of independent, unbiased focus groups or research. You need to go and talk to your friends and family, and they're gonna lie to you. It's nice to hear, but it's not very useful from the product development. That's why it's somebody gonna put in and put their money into this is the ultimate measure. Speed, which also Daisy mentioned, the way the market evolves, especially around AI products, is super competitive. So we really need to move fast and learn fast. And this is why within 12 months we had an app, then a web app, then Looker Studio, then some web app again. And it's fine, it's completely fine, but you need to move fast. And one of the good learnings on that journey to deliver to the clients was also that your early adopters, so the people who are putting in and work with you at that early stage, they're quite tolerant. So they want to be a part of your journey. They want to support you. They want you to succeed because they paid you, so they don't want you to fail. So I think it's quite useful and helpful in using that early adopters as people who can really guide your product development and design. And lastly, the brand. Again, this is all what Daisy was talking about. It was a glue from the very beginning, since we landed on Flare as a name and as a brand. That became a glue for the team to sort of have that identity for the clients, for investors, for our followers, so that even though the product might iterate and change, the brand, the Flare is Flare, and there is a recognition of continuity behind this. And it really became that kind of a core of the evolving product that we can sort of coerce and not really think about too much. It's just kind of a simple, when you create something new, when you deliver to the client, you don't need to think. You have it as a part of identity. So I think it's been a great journey from that perspective. Just one thing that I want to say to close it, it's kind of a more of the personal career choices and what this startup means. For me, it was also a kind of a choice between I want to create an opportunity for myself, an opportunity to build a business, to bring it to to the audience, to bring it to the market. And setting up and starting your own business is a really good way of doing this. Daisy was sharing her own story. I think especially for women, it's incredibly important that we do create those opportunities for ourselves, and we take those risks. And if you do have an opportunity and situation, whatever conditions, to take that leap, it's really out there and it's really worth it. There is a lot of startups. There's a lot of people with ideas who want to do things. You can really gain huge amounts of experience working in that sector. So definitely encourage that as a career choice as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both. That's been fantastic. What a great story, and I love that you shared your personal stories as well, and you can see everybody's reactions is very much appreciated, and that's for me, it's fantastic to get that more personal element of what's happening behind the business. We are all on a journey after all. So it's great that we heard your stories and learned a little bit more about your journeys. I can see there's a question, so I'm just gonna go straight to that. But before I do that, I'll stop the recording. We want to keep the questions kind of stress-free. So